Okay, John, how you doing?
Good, Sal. How you doing? Thanks
Good.
for
It's
having me
good to,
on.
yeah, it's good to see you. I appreciate you joining us today. I just saw one of your posts, your uploads of the NABBA Mr. Universe. It was the 1967 Mr. Universe,
Okay,
where
yeah,
you got Bill Pearl and Arnold, right?
yeah, yeah.
And I was looking at it. I was looking at the photos, and I really liked the look from that period. The guys
Hmm.
were real muscular, but they weren't like really ripped. I mean, almost if, on some poses, if you look at Bill Pearl, he looks kind of fluffy and kind of
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
No disrespect, but he looks
Right.
a little chubby. You go, wow, but that was the look.
That was the
And
look back then, right?
to me, that looks. I like that look.
Me too. I think a lot of people do. Yeah, a lot of people like that look. And Bill was, a real popular bodybuilder. He was one of the biggest bodybuilders, well, both physically and his popularity at that time. And he won the Mr. Universe 4 times.
Right.
But yeah, a lot of people like that look. It wasn't, I think, until I think the 70s, probably especially the late 70s when the definition really became more. And then when Frank Zane was winning, of course, it was really, really important. And I remember those years because that's when I started competing. And I remember even seeing it on the local level, like the bodybuilders were much more ripped, even on like Mr. Chicago or Mr. Midwest.
Right.
And it was those guys that would win, even if it was a smaller guy. So it was like the definition part of it was much more important with the judges.
The definition that the current bodybuilders have now,
Yeah.
like you could see the striations like in their glutes, how
Yeah,
much
yeah,
weight they lose, how much fat they lose. And you look
yeah,
at the shot from Arnold, he still had the Christmas tree, but he still had folds in his buttocks and stuff.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it's like, so you could see, I guess, back in the day that maybe you could get away with 12 weeks of dieting or something,
yeah,
right? And still get in shape. But these guys, modern day guys, they're months, right? They're for many months, right?
yeah, yeah. It's just different standards, and it seems like once the standard is introduced, then it applies to everybody,
Mhm.
all the way down to the local level. So once ripped glutes became in vogue, then everybody had to have ripped glutes, and if you didn't have ripped glutes, no matter what the rest of your body looked like, you were considered out of shape.
Right, right.
So that's just the way it was going. Yeah, but you're right. Arnold had striations in his lower back, but nobody had glutes back then. The glutes were always covered with the posing trunks. You never. Now they're all hiked up and they're
Right.
designed to show off that area.
Back in the day, they had height classes and weight classes. Why do you think they got rid of that?
Well, I think the height classes started with the AAU with the Mr. America contest, and then they eventually transitioned into weight classes. I think that had to do with Ben Weider trying to make it more of an Olympic sport,
Mm.
and all the other sports were doing weight classes as well. So I think that's why he made that transition. And first they started off with a lightweight class, a middleweight class, and just a heavyweight class. And then they went into a light heavyweight class. And then they eventually added like a welterweight,
Oh,
bantamweight,
goodness.
super heavyweight. They didn't have the super heavyweights until probably the last maybe 20 years, I would think, 15, 20 years when the guys started getting super big. So the super heavyweights is anything over 225, where before it was just the heavyweights were 198 and up. So yeah, it's really changed over the years for sure.
And then they even had like best body part like categories,
Yeah, yeah, which
right?
I used to really like. Yeah,
Yeah,
that was
and sometimes I would read like from the 60s or 70s maybe that a guy would win like most muscular, but like he didn't win the overall. I mean, I wonder how that worked, right?
yeah. I think again that was involved with the AAU Mr. America because they started that contest in 1939. So that was a couple years after the Miss America started, the beauty pageant, and I think they were kind of basing it along those guidelines. We're gonna have a male contest of the Miss America.
Mm,
So they didn't have a talent portion, but they did have an interview portion where the judges would interview each competitor, and they wanted to know, what your background was because they were looking for the all-American male,
mm-hmm.
which isn't necessarily the best built male. So a
Got
lot
it.
of times, especially when it started in the 1940s and 1950s, they were still kind of prejudiced, and they would like exclude black bodybuilders
Sure.
because there was many years, many cases where you had these really great, really naturally developed, I would say, black bodybuilders, and they would not win.
Right.
And I think it was a prejudice thing, if especially if the contests were held down south. sometimes they would rate you on your personality, like if you didn't have much of a personality. There was Harold Poole was competing in the AAU Mr. America for a couple of years, and everybody, all the reports I read said he was by far the winner. And he was, I think, 18 or 19 when he was doing it. He was amazing. And he had a stuttering problem. So they said, well, we're not going to give it Mr. America to him, because what if he goes on a talk show or if he gets interviewed for a newspaper and he stutters? It's going to put a bad image to bodybuilding. So we can't make him the winner.
Right.
And then Sergio Oliva, when he came over from Cuba, he started competing in the AAU Mr. America as well. But Sergio was from Cuba and he had an accent. And I don't think he spoke English hardly at all when he first came here. So the same reason they couldn't put him as Mr. America. And the same thing, he got fifth that year, and everybody said, oh, he should have won easily. It wasn't even close, and he got fifth. It was ridiculous.
Right.
So what they did was they developed this most muscular award, and they would give the most muscular award to usually the guy who had the best physique, but he wouldn't always win the contest because it was based a lot on personality and maybe prejudice and all these other things,
So then Chris Dickerson finally comes along, and
yes.
he's the first African-American guy to win the contest, right?
Yeah, and Chris was very well spoken. He was very articulate. He was a real gentleman. Of course, he had an opera background, so he had an upbringing in the arts, and they loved him. All the top AAU guys. Bob Hoffman, I think, said at a picnic the year before, he said, Chris Dickerson's going to be our next Mr. America. Wow. So he was the one to break the color barrier, and that was in 1970. And I'm sure a lot of that had to do with how articulate Chris was, how intelligent he was, how well spoken he was.
Right.
And but he also had a fantastic physique, and he was winning all the shows back then. He won the Mr. USA, the Junior Mr. America, and things like that. And Chris actually got a late start in bodybuilding. I think he was in his mid-20s before he ever touched a weight. Wow. But he had fantastic genetics, and he grew really, really quickly. And he was one of those few guys that had really good balance. His legs were fantastic. He had unbelievable calves, and just everything was in balance. But he was also trained by Bill Pearl, which helped a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it reminds me of an older gentleman. I think he was from Great Britain. Vic Downs, I think that's what his name.
Yeah,
he also started, I think, in his 30s. I think I'm not sure.
You're right. Yeah, I interviewed Vic a couple of years ago for my podcast.
Oh wow!
And he's in his 90s now.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, and he's still around. So
wow, what a handsome guy! What a good time that was. So time goes on. They decided to get rid of the Mr. America and the Mr. Universe contests, right? But what contest? What's the equivalent contest now? Do we have any contest that takes the place of Mr. America and Mr. Universe?
Well, what happened was when you had the Mr. America, the NABBA Mr. Universe started over in London. I think the first year for that was 1950, and so they kind of became associated with each other. So the NABBA Universe would pull in competitors from all around the world, and it was really an international field. If you go back and look at some of those contests, it was amazing. You would get bodybuilders from all over Europe, England, France, Germany, Australia, Japan, everywhere. It was unbelievable. They had such an international field, and the judging was highly regarded as being very fair. They would do the pre-judging, not in a theater, but just in a regular room. And the bodybuilders would be standing on a floor in line with the judges, and the judges would be sitting behind a table, and they would, move the guys around and stuff. Sometimes the judges would even get up and look at different angles. So it was just flat lighting. It wasn't like it is today where it was in a stage. And so those two contests were probably the most popular and biggest contests. The Mr. America was definitely the biggest amateur contest in the world. And then the Mr. Universe was regarded as the best contest. And then the Mr. Olympia came along in 1965. And then when the Weider started the I.F.B.B, they were in competition with NABBA and with the AAU. And eventually they got to a point where they took over. They wanted to work with the AAU. So they wanted the AAU to run the amateur part of bodybuilding, and then they were going to run the professional part. And this was in the 70s when professional bodybuilding was starting to get going. And the AAU, a lot of those guys, a lot of those old time guys, they didn't trust Weider. They thought he was a shady businessman, right, and they didn't want anything to do with him. So they were trying for years to get together, and they couldn't do it. So finally, Weider said, screw it. We'll just create our own amateur organization. We'll go head to head with the AAU. And that was the MPC. And then when all the bodybuilders competing realized that the only way to get into the Mr. Olympia and into professional bodybuilding and really into the magazines, which was Weider was, you know, running the magazines. The only way to do that was you had to go through the NPC. That's when everybody made the switch. And it was only a matter of a couple of years before the AAU died out because nobody competed anymore. So that was pretty much the end of the Mr. America. And there was actually a legal battle with the name Mr. America. So the AAU, of course, wanted to keep it because they had started it in 1939. And the NPC wanted to have the name Mr. America. And they went to court, and the court decided with the AAU because they had it since the beginning. So the AAU was able to hold on to the Mr. America, and the NPC just started a contest. Their first contest was called the American Bodybuilding Championships instead of Mr. America. And that was in 1982, the year Lee Haney won. And then by 1983, they changed it to the National Bodybuilding Championships. So then they later just called that the NPC Nationals. And so, yeah, the Mr. America was pretty much dead. And then the NABBA universe went on for many years. And I believe it might even still be going on, but it's just not getting any coverage at all. It's not as popular, you know, because it's really run, everything is run now by the I.F.B.B and the NPC. It's pretty much a monopoly. They run everything.
Yeah, and how far they've come. I think like when Larry Scott won the first Olympia, I don't even think he got any prize money.
No, he didn't. Yeah.
Right. And a lot of these guys, they still had full-time jobs.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's crazy.
Yeah. All those guys that were competing in the Mr. America were all, there was no professional bodybuilding at all back then. So they were all working full-time jobs and traveling. And I talked to Boyer Coe and Chris Dickerson on my podcast, and they said that sometimes they would all get like 4 or 5 guys in a hotel room, you know, because nobody had any money. So they would just all, you know, stay together for that weekend and compete. And then they all go out and eat afterwards. And there was a lot of camaraderie because it was just for fun. It wasn't like a career. They weren't making any money at it.
Right.
And it was just, you know, really easy going.
You know, I remember when I first started buying the bodybuilding magazines, I would also buy Dan Laurie's, was it Muscle Training Illustrated or something like that? Yeah. And I would see Chris Dickerson and Boyer Coe, they always seemed to be competing against each other.
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
In WBBG contests, whatever they were, right?
Yeah.
So a couple of years go by, whatever. The next thing I know, I see him in Joe Weider's magazine.
Yeah.
You know, so I guess they made the jump from New York or back east to Joe Weider's magazine.
Yeah, so, I think Arnold was a big part of that, because when Arnold and Jim Lorimer started promoting the Mr. Olympia in 1976, after Arnold retired, he went out and recruited bodybuilders. So he was talking to like Boyer Coe and Chris Dickerson and Frank Zane and those guys, Dennis Tinerino. And, you know, Arnold competed with those guys in the NABBA universe back in the 60s and early 70s. So he said, you know, come over to the Mr. Olympia. And that's what made it, that's why they made the switch and they jumped over. And that was, like I said, that's when pro bodybuilding took off, because it really didn't start taking off until 1978. And Wayne DeMilia was a big part of it, because Wayne DeMilia did the first Night of the Champions, and then he started promoting a lot of professional shows, like a circuit.
They had a Grand Prix. They had a Grand
Prix, right? Exactly.
So, you know, but like when you started prepping for contests, like how far out did you start your cut in your diet? How far out did you go to get in shape?
Well, like I said, when I was a teenager, I only did it for 4 weeks.
4 weeks.
And then when I turned 20, I competed a lot as a teenager. Too much, really. I didn't realize what I was doing back then. I was doing like 3 or 4 shows a year. So in a 3-year period from 16 to 19 years old, I did 10 teenage contests, which was way too much. I should have just did 1 show a year and used the rest of the year just to develop my physique. But I really got into competition. It was a great form of motivation for me to compete. So I just got too involved with it. So by the time I did my last teenage show, my 10th one, I really felt like I was burned out. And I just felt like I really needed to develop my physique a lot more. So I took the next 2 years off of competition, and my main focus was just getting bigger, bigger, bigger. So because my metabolism was so fast, I had to drastically increase my calories. I think I went up to like 5,000 calories a day. I was force feeding myself, you know, in order to get bigger. And eventually I got up to 230 pounds. So that was like 100 pounds bigger than when I started at 135. So then when I went back into competition, of course, now I had a whole different body. I mean, I wasn't the same 180-pound teenager. Now I was 230 pounds. So now I had a diet for like 12 weeks. And then I would say in my 20s, it was usually like a 10 or 12-week diet. And because I was kind of ectomorphic and my challenge was always try to get bigger and bigger and bigger, I would spend every year in the off season bulking up. So I would always go up to like 230, sometimes even 240. And I did this all through my natural bodybuilding as well. So I would spend like 9 months of the year bulking up and then 3 months of the year dieting down. And then as I got older, I would diet even longer. You know, I remember the year I won that Natural Mr. Universe, I think I was 29. I dieted 16 weeks. So I was making, so it all depended on how big I got in the off season.
Oh,
When
got
I
it.
won
Got it.
when I won my second Natural Mr. Universe, I was 243 in the off season. So I was really big and really bulked up. So I knew it was going to take a long time to come down, because as a natural bodybuilder, what you have to do is you have to diet very slowly to hold on to the muscle and lose the fat. You have to lose the fat really slow. If you try to diet too fast, you will inevitably lose muscle.
Mm-hmm.
So by bulking up and getting that big, I had to use, I think, a 20-week diet that year, which is like 5 months. So it's a long time.
Right.
So yeah, but that's basically, it was always my plan when I was competing, was I would have the bulk up season and then I would have the diet down season. And now that I'm older, I don't really bulk up anymore. It's because your body changes, your metabolism changes. It's easier to get fat.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's a waste of time really to do that. So it's better just to stay leaner. And especially if I was going to compete or do a photo shoot or something, it's much easier to come down when you've only got like maybe 10 pounds to lose than when you got like 30 pounds to lose.
When you finally get contest weight, how low were your calories, you think?
Well, when I was younger, I could diet on 3,000. You know, like when I won the first Natural Mr. Universe, I remember I was eating 3,000 calories a day, and I got ripped on that diet as long as I stayed with it. Then as I got older, I think around like 40, I noticed I had to cut it back even more. Now that I'm in my 50s, I have to diet at around like 2,300. So if I even eat 3,000, which was what I was dieting on before, I would get bulky, I would get fat, you know.
Oh my
So
God.
yeah, everything changes as you get older, you know, so you have to keep adjusting, and your metabolism slows down. So you got to eat less calories. But I always try to eat as many calories as I can while still losing the weight. So if I can lose weight at 2,300, I'm not going to go down to 2,100, you know. And it's the same thing with cardio. I'm not going to, if I can get cut, there's a lot of shows I did back in the past where I did no cardio and I got ripped. So that was great. Why do the cardio if you don't have to?
Right, right.
So nowadays I'm doing like 3 days a week cardio, and that's helping, you know, that helps the diet and it helps speed up the whole process. But I don't have to do 6 days a week, or, you know, sometimes I'll see some competitors, like especially the bikini competitors, they'll be doing 6 days a week, twice a day of cardio. So I think when you're doing that much cardio, there's probably something wrong with your nutrition. You should be able to, I think, lose most of your fat and get most of your definition just through your nutrition, and the cardio should just help that.
So when you went down to the lowest calories, like how hungry were you? Were you very hungry?
Oh yeah, yeah. That's always the problem, or the challenge, I should say, when you're dieting. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. But I remember like when I won my first contest, which was the Mr. Illinois, the Illinois State Championship, when I was 23, I was so hungry. Sometimes I couldn't even sleep at night, you know. And I remember I was bouncing, and I was working at this bar that was open till 4 o'clock in the morning, and I would just be standing there miserable drinking ice water, you know. And I would go to bed hungry, and it was, I don't really know how many calories I was eating at that point, but I was really, really, really starving, you know. So it's tough, you know, when you diet, that's definitely the hardest thing, because you're depriving yourself of calories. But at the same time, the reason why bodybuilding is so tough is you have to continue training hard even while you're not eating. And there's really no other athletes that do that. Maybe wrestlers, but most athletes are eating the food they need, and they have the energy they need to perform the sport. But because we're all based on physical appearance, we have to get rid of the body fat. And that's the most important part of competing. You have to be ripped. The guy who's ripped is usually the one who wins. So we have to get rid of the body fat. So the diet is most important. But at the same time, we still have to train heavy and train hard and keep pushing it in order to hold on to that muscle tissue. If you change it around and go light, and make the workouts easier, you will definitely lose muscle. So you really have to push it hard while you're dieting and depriving yourself of these calories.
So when you were dropping weight, uh, were you blessed, like where you lost weight all over the body, or did you lose like maybe the waist and the hips was the last to go?
Yeah, the waist and the hips is definitely the last to go. With me, it always starts like on the outside. So it would be like my forearms and my calves would get lean first, and then it would be my thighs and my arms, and then it would
Right.
get into my torso, and then the waist and the lower back would be the last thing. The lower abs and the lower back is the
So
last thing.
so you could see the conditioning coming in,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you would gauge it. So would you take pictures of yourself? I know Frank Zane talked about how he would take, photos of himself so he could see how he was doing.
Yeah, I did that too. I would look at myself in the gym mirror, or at the mirror at home, and I would also take pictures. But I remember I did one show where I thought I was in great shape, and I was looking in the mirror, and I'm like, man, I'm gonna kill it. I'm really in great shape. And then I went into the contest, and I only got fourth. And when I saw the pictures, I saw I was off. So that's when I started doing more measurements too, because I knew that in order to be ripped, my waist would have to be a certain size. So every time I did a show from then on, I always measured my waist. And I knew once I got to that measurement that I was ripped. So I started going by not only how I looked and not only how the pictures looked, but also some more objective criteria, which was the waist size.
Right.
And then also you can kind of gauge it by your weight too, because, when you're competing, exactly like kind of what your weight should be. But the weight, that's the same thing. You always try to, I'd be happy being heavier as long as I'm ripped, because you want the most amount of muscle.
Right, right. So John, did you log all your workouts, your training, the food you ate, all that stuff?
Yes. Maybe not as much when I was a teenager, and I wish I would have did it a little bit more as a teenager, but definitely as I got into my 20s, my 30s, I wrote down all my workouts. I would have this little workout book, and I would bring it with me in my gym bag, and I would write down my workouts. And then I use that as motivation. So I would try to outdo the last workout. And same thing with my nutrition. I started writing down everything I was eating for a contest. So I was gauging exactly what I was taking. So I knew I wasn't, blowing my diet or eating too many calories.
Right.
Because, a lot of times, and this just came from trial and error, I would be getting ready for a show, and sometimes I would hit my peak and sometimes I wouldn't. So I'm like, well, there's got to be a pattern to this. If I'm doing it right, I got to figure out what I did when I was doing it right. So then I would started writing everything down, and I would look at it and I would see what would work. And even like week to week, like, did I lose any weight this week? Is my waist going down? Why not? Okay, let me look back. How many calories was I eating? What kind of training was I doing? And I was trying to figure this whole process out. And everybody's different, everybody's body is different. So I tried to figure out what worked for me. So that's what I did with my book, Diary of a Natural Bodybuilder, was I took all my notes from all these contests I competed in as a natural bodybuilder, and I put them all together in a book. And I said, well, this is what I did for this contest, with my training and my diet. This is what I did for this contest. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. Sometimes I was too smooth. Sometimes I was too flat. And sometimes it worked perfectly. And I competed in great shape and I won, or I was at least in great shape. So that was the whole idea of that book. And I was trying different supplements, and I was trying different training methods and different dieting methods. And so it was really interesting. And I think Frank Zane, I think, might have even done something similar with his. I know he was a big proponent of writing everything down as well, So I think in order to be successful, you got to figure out what works well for your body. And unfortunately, today's bodybuilders are always using coaches. Everybody who gets ready for a show hires a coach. So they don't really know what works for their body,
Right.
And I think that was the difference between what's going on today and how it used to be back in the day. Was we all just had to figure it out ourselves. So I probably could have benefited having a coach, back then.
Right.
But not always, sometimes the coach doesn't know. I don't think nobody knows your body better than you, especially after you've been competing for a while and you've done a few shows. You know what works for you and what doesn't,
So now your Diary of the Natural Bodybuilder, can we still get that book? Is that still available?
Yeah, it's on Amazon, and it's also on my website, johnhansenfitness.com. And I also have another book called the MP6 Workout, which is basically a training program where I designed my training program based on cycles. So I'll do 6-week cycles for mass and 6-week cycles for power. And that's kind of the training program that I've been following for the last probably 5 years or so. And it really works well. Instead of just going to the gym and trying to train as hard as you think you can, or just try to train instinctive, I know exactly what I'm doing every time I go to the gym. I know what weights I'm doing, what reps I'm doing, and then it progressively increases in resistance and intensity over that 6-week cycle. And then I also have another book called Bodybuilding Heroes and Legends, which is kind of a bodybuilding history book, and it covers a lot of the contests from the 1970s. And then years ago, I think it was 2005, I wrote a book for Human Kinetics called Natural Bodybuilding, which I think is out of print, but you can still find it on eBay and Amazon and stuff.
You know, I'll look at natural bodybuilding contests on YouTube now and then,
Mhm.
and I noticed that, and it's not a bad criticism about the natural bodybuilders, but I'll see them, and they usually seem to weigh maybe 170 pounds and more, right?
Yeah.
And they look muscular to me, but in some ways they look kind of like deflated, right?
Yeah.
But like, and I don't understand like guys like you or Arnold or Robbie Robinson. It almost looks like someone stuck a straw in their belly button and blew air in there, and you guys just you had this upward, this big look,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Uh-huh.
but I don't see that with the natural guys as much. I mean, what do you think that's attributed to?
Well, obviously the steroids create a lot more size. But I think again, the emphasis on natural bodybuilding is conditioning, and they're just trying to come in as ripped as possible. So even though they're not big guys and they don't look like big guys in clothes or probably off the stage, when they get on stage under the lights and they can show that definition, then they're really, really ripped and they're going to place high. And usually the guy who wins is the guy who's the most ripped. And they're taking the same standards that were in regular bodybuilding, which is the ripped glutes, the conditioning,
Right.
and they're applying it now to natural bodybuilders. So the natural bodybuilders have to also be ripped with the striated glutes. But the problem is when you're taking steroids, the steroids hold on to the muscle.
Mm.
So you can go through these extreme diets and lots of cardio and use steroids, and you're not going to get small. You're not going to lose that muscle. So that's why those guys compete so big, and they have the striated glutes.
Right.
Because of the drugs. When you try to do that same kind of conditioning without the drugs,
Right.
you end up with what the natural bodybuilders look like, which is the same kind of conditioning, but a much, much smaller body.
Well, that explains it. Yeah.
What I did when I was competing in natural bodybuilding was, I was going by the standard of what I grew up with, which is what I wanted to look like, which was Arnold and Cal Scalak and those guys. So even though I was natural, I still wanted to look like those guys. I wanted to look like, in fact, I would rather look like Arnold and lose the contest than, get more ripped and lose that look and win the contest. So I was going for a certain look.
Right.
Like when I got up on stage and I hit a front double bicep pose, I wanted big arms and I wanted a big rib cage and I wanted those lats to come out. I wanted the audience to go, whoa, look at that guy. I wanted to be impressive.
Awesome.
And then when I hit a 3/4 back pose and a rear lat spread pose and a most muscular, I wanted to really impress people, the judges as well as the audience. I wanted to look the way I wanted to look. So I always went for that look. That's why I would bulk up. A lot of natural bodybuilders will stay lean all the time. They won't bulk up, but I didn't care. I wanted to bulk up. So that's why I went up to like 230, 240 pounds, which you don't look aesthetic at that weight. And you don't look maybe even attractive at that weight, but I didn't care. I was just trying to build the most amount of muscle possible because I knew when I cut down and I went through that long dieting process, I was going to have more muscle on stage. So it worked for me. I mean, when I won the first Natural Mr. Universe, I weighed 198. When I won the second one 4 years later, I was 208. So I was 10 pounds heavier as a natural bodybuilder. And that wasn't a result of steroids because I was natural. That was a result of eating and training heavy and bulking up and going through that whole process. So I think that's the difference. It's basically just your approach. So I think more natural bodybuilders could look bigger if they really focused on building more size. But I think some of them have this limitation in their mind where they think, well, I'm natural. I'm not going to bulk up. I'm not going to get too big in the off season. I think a lot of them think, well, I can only get so big, because I'm natural.
Right.
And I think you can't have that mindset. It's like the same thing as like when you get older. well, I can't really train too heavy because I'm older, or, I guess I look pretty good for my age. I never have that mindset. I'm like, I just want to look the best I can look.
Right.
So when I diet down, even if I'm in my 50s, I want to look better than I did I want to look the best I ever looked, better than when I was 25, which of course is impossible, but I don't care. I don't look at the age. And when I was competing as a natural bodybuilder, I didn't look at the fact that I was natural. I still wanted to get as big as I could possibly get,
Sure. Yeah, and when you hit those double bicep pose or the lat pose, you had that awesome vacuum, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, when was the last time we saw a vacuum shot on besides the classic physique category?
Yeah, that was an important pose, or that was an important look back in the day, was to have the vacuum. And I think a lot of that had to do with the pullovers, but also a lot of it had to do with the people were looking for more of an aesthetic look back then, and they wanted the smaller waist. And it was expected that every bodybuilder, no matter how big you were going to have a small waist. You were going to have that V taper.
Right, right. So back in the day, most of the champs had those little 5x7 little training booklets.
Yeah.
Right. Like Arnold had them and Zane had them. All the guys had them, right? Did you ever buy any of those?
Oh yeah.
Programs?
Yeah, I bought all of Arnold's. Yeah.
Back in the day, did you ever get a chance to train at Gold's Gym or the World Gym in Venice and Santa Monica?
Yeah, when I was probably in the 90s, I think in the 2000s, I went out there occasionally. When I was living in Chicago, that was like a great trip for all of us to go out there, to train at the Mecca.
Right.
So in California, it was beautiful. It was just palm trees and great weather and the beach and everything. So it was like paradise, So yeah, a lot of us would go out there on occasion and just go out there for a week or something and train out there. Have you ever been out there, Sal? Have you ever been out to Gold's Gym in Venice?
Well, yeah, John, when I was a young boy back like in 74, 75, I lived in a little city called Inglewood, which was about 13 miles or so away from Venice Beach. And my sister drew a map for me one time on how to get to Muscle Beach. So me and my buddies, we'd ride our bikes out there, spend the day at Muscle Beach. And I would take a little Instamatic camera with me. And there were weekends where I would see Arnold out there. They would train in the pit.
Wow.
And I would see Roger Collard. I would see Dennis Tenorino out there.
Wow, what year was that?
That was like I kept a little diary, and it was like 1974, 75 in the summer.
Okay.
And then we would ride our bikes down a mile down the street on Pacific and look through the window of Gold's Gym.
Oh, wow.
It's like there's all the guys. There's like Ken Waller's over there. They're exercising. It's like the guys in the magazines. Like here they are.
Yeah, came to life. Yeah.
And boy, those were great memories. A lot of fun. Yeah. It was very different back then.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So,
and do you still have those pictures?
I do. I have a few pictures and of Arnold, and he was playing like soccer with like a basketball or something, and he had these flowery sort of posing trunks on. I mean, and he looked like a god, John. I'm telling you, it was awesome. When you're like 14 years old and you weigh like 85 pounds or something, and you see these guys just like your superheroes you're talking about.
Right.
Like, here they are. They like their clothes is like their muscles. That's them.
I know.
And people would just crowd around them. Like you didn't see those guys like that back in the day like that.
No, not at all. Yeah.
So it was very cool. John, with your busy schedule like that you have now, what do your workouts look like now?
I usually train at least 4 days a week. And I train each body part once a week now, except calves I'll do twice a week. So I'll train chest and triceps together, and then I'll do legs and abs, and then I'll do shoulders and calves, and finish with back and biceps at the end of the week. So I still train a lot of the compound movements, still a lot of the basic exercises, barbells and dumbbells. I prefer using that over cables or machines. And I'll still train pretty heavy, like 6 to 10 repetitions. And I'm always trying to go a little heavier. Just really kind of the same routine I've been following all these years.
Right. Yeah. One of the follow-up question I had was, we're all getting older. It's like the constant, battle of the bulge. So what do you do now? I know we had talked a little bit about calories and your cardio. So what do you do to really just keep your weight under control?
I basically eat like good foods, and every meal every day is pretty much the same. but that's okay because I like the foods that I'm eating, so I enjoy it. And you really just got to stay away from the extra stuff, you know, the extra calories, the processed foods. I think the average person, one of the big mistakes they make is they go out to eat a lot, or they just don't follow a structured plan. You know, most people eat whenever they're hungry. So they'll eat 2 meals a day, they'll eat 3 meals a day. That a lot of them will skip breakfast, and then they'll, you know, if they're at a job or school or whatever, they'll go out and eat lunch, and then they'll eat at night. But they basically just eat what they like, which isn't the right way to eat. So you have to eat, like, I eat good food. I'll eat like my protein. I'll eat egg whites and ground turkey and chicken and lean beef, round steak, salmon, things like that. And then for my carbohydrates, I'll have like oatmeal or oat bran. I'll have Ezekiel muffins. I'll have sweet potatoes, baked potatoes, jasmine rice, brown rice, things like that. So those are all good complex carbohydrates and good complete protein foods. And I'll combine those and eat those throughout the day. And I think that's really, once you start eating the right foods and start eating like 6 meals a day, I still believe in eating 6 meals a day because I think that stimulates your metabolism. Every time you eat a meal, your body has to process that food, which means it has to expend energy, and that increases your metabolism. So I think that, and plus you're getting the nutrients you need to rebuild the muscle tissue, because if you're following a weight training program and you're tearing down muscle, you've got to feed it with that protein, and you've got to feed it with the glycogen from the carbohydrates. So I think it's more efficient to do it where you're eating 6 meals a day, eating every 3 hours, than it is to try and get it all in 1 or 2 meals, you know?
Right.
So those are the basic rules I follow: eating the 6 meals a day, eating the right kind of foods, and then just basically eating the right amount of those foods. So, you know, your macros are right, your protein, your carbohydrates, your fats, and the right amount of calories.
So John, you know, if people want to get a hold of you, maybe, you know, purchase some of your books or, you know, personalized training, how do they get a hold of you?
Well, my official website is johnhansenfitness.com. And then the website for the podcast is bodybuildinglegendshow.com. So they could do it either way there. My email address is naturalolympia@gmail.com, based on the Natural Olympia contest that I won, of course. So yeah, any one of those, you know, my 2 websites or just the email address.
Well, thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And until the next video, keep training.